Millions lost, thousands dead. The world trembles on the brink of war. August 17, 2025. In the dark silence of the Pacific, 3 Chinese intercontinental ballistic missiles, each traveling at more than 15,000 miles per hour, slashed the sky toward a U.S. aircraft carrier strike group. In a matter of minutes, thousands of American sailors were nearly annihilated. 2 were destroyed, but 1 missed close enough to rip the hull of the USS Ronald Reagan, sending a $70 million jet into the sea. What followed was the deadliest clash since the Cuban Missile Crisis. The immediate U.S. response was overwhelming. B-2 bombers, Tomahawk missiles, and a precision strike wiped out 20% of China's nuclear arsenal overnight. In response, Beijing launched 20 intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, at American cities. What happened to the sailors on that American ship? Could they have survived? After the U.S. counterattacked and destroyed its nuclear arsenal, did China successfully retaliate? I will show you the truth right away. August 17, 2025. At 2:13 a.m., the quiet night over the Pacific Ocean shattered in an instant. From deep within China's mainland, 3 intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, thundered into the sky, their flames tearing through the darkness. Each missile, costing more than $110 million and weighing over 80 tons, was designed for one purpose: to destroy America's most powerful symbol of strength, the U.S. aircraft carrier strike group near Taiwan. Within seconds, radar screens aboard the USS Ronald Reagan lit up with warnings. Sailors jolted awake to the blaring of battle alarms. The missiles were traveling at 15,000 miles per hour, 20 times the speed of sound, meaning the fleet had barely 12 minutes to react before impact. For every man and woman on those ships, the clock was ticking down to life or death. The U.S. defenses roared alive. The Aegis combat system locked onto the incoming warheads, while THAAD interceptors prepared to fire. At 180 miles out, the first missile was obliterated in a flash brighter than lightning. Seconds later, the second warhead disintegrated at 70 miles altitude, leaving nothing but fragments raining into the sea. But then came the third missile, the one that slipped through the cracks. Traveling lower, faster, and hidden by electronic countermeasures, it streaked toward the carrier's heart. The intercept window narrowed to seconds. At the last possible moment, an SM-6 missile connected. The warhead exploded, but it was too close. The shockwave slammed into the starboard side of the Ronald Reagan with the force of 10 tons of TNT. Metal screamed as a hole the size of a truck was ripped open in the hull. 7 sailors stationed nearby were thrown violently against steel bulkheads, their bodies battered and broken. On the flight deck above, a fully armed FA-18 Super Hornet, worth $70 million, was lifted off its landing gear and hurled into the ocean like a piece of scrap. For the first time since World War II, an American carrier had felt the raw firepower of a foreign superpower. To older Americans who remembered the Cuban Missile Crisis, the chilling echoes were unmistakable. This was the kind of confrontation that could ignite a world war. Yet amid the chaos and fire, one fact stood out. America's defenses had stopped the unthinkable. 2 missiles destroyed outright, 1 neutralized just feet from disaster. Thousands of lives had been saved, but the message was unmistakable. Beijing was no longer bluffing. They had crossed a line and the world would never be the same. Do you think the United States would respond with weapons of mass destruction? Or would it negotiate peace? Let me know in the comments. Now join me in looking at the carrier's horrific damage. The echoes of the missile blast still vibrated through the steel hull when the first casualty reports arrived. 7 sailors critically injured. 1 $70 million FA-18 Super Hornet lost. A hole 20 feet wide ripped open in the starboard hull of the Ronald Reagan. Not since the kamikaze strikes of World War II had an American carrier suffered such visible damage. For the men and women on board, the unthinkable had just happened. A foreign power had managed to wound the U.S. Navy's crown jewel. At 3:01 a.m., Rear Admiral Thomas Caldwell demanded a secure line to the Pentagon. His voice was measured, but the fury behind it was unmistakable. This was not intimidation. This was an assassination attempt against 5,000 sailors and airmen. The numbers told the story. If just one of those ICBMs had penetrated the final defense ring, The blast equivalent of 1.5 million pounds of TNT could have obliterated the carrier outright, killing thousands in seconds and sinking a $13 billion warship into the Pacific. In Washington, President Donald Trump was briefed within 5 minutes. A dozen advisors debated restraint, but time was slipping away. At 3:08 a.m., he gave the order with just 4 words: strike back, make it count. The retaliation plan unfolded with terrifying precision. EA-18G Growler jets would launch first, projecting electronic noise powerful enough to blind enemy radar across a 200-mile corridor. Behind them, 4 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, each worth $2.2 billion, armed with GBU-57 bunker busters weighing 30,000 pounds each. Bombs capable of penetrating 200 feet of reinforced concrete before detonation. To support the bombers, 4 KC-135 tankers carried enough fuel to keep the strike package airborne for an additional 12 hours. Overhead, 20 F-35 Lightning II fighters worth a combined $1.6 billion would provide an aerial shield, intercepting any Chinese aircraft or missile threat. From the sea, 15 Tomahawk cruise missiles, each with a range of 1,000 miles and a warhead packing 1,000 pounds of explosives, would follow the B-2 strikes by just seconds, compounding the shockwave into devastation no bunker could survive. By 3:22 a.m., the order was signed. Flight decks thundered as catapults launched the first wave into the night sky. The operation's combined firepower represented over $10 billion of American steel and technology, all aimed at one purpose: erasing the bases that had dared to launch missiles at the United States Navy. For the sailors standing on the deck, watching jet after jet disappear into the black horizon, there was no more fear, only resolve. China had drawn first blood. Now America would answer with overwhelming firepower, and the world would never forget what came next. Now America would respond with overwhelming firepower, and the world would never forget what happened next. Support us by liking and subscribing. Now join me in witnessing the fury of American military might. The night over the Pacific exploded into motion. By 3:30 a.m., the first wave of EA-18G Growlers screamed off the deck, their engines burning white-hot. Within minutes, they crossed the invisible boundary line, flooding Chinese radar networks with electronic chaos. Towers from Fujian to Guangdong lit up with static. For the first time, China's vaunted Great Wall of Air Defense was blind. Then came the shadows. At 3:47 a.m., 4 B-2 Spirit bombers, each worth $2.2 billion, slipped silently across the Pacific sky. Their radar cross-section was no larger than a bird. Loaded deep inside their bomb bays, GBU-57 bunker busters, each weighing 30,000 pounds, each with the power to carve through 200 feet of reinforced concrete. Every bomb carried the destructive force of 11 tons of TNT, enough to level entire city blocks. As they closed in, the strike group prepared its second hammer. 15 Tomahawk cruise missiles arced into the sky, traveling low at 550 miles per hour. Their timing was choreographed down to the second, arriving just after the B-2 bombs hit, so the dual shockwaves would merge into one overwhelming blast. At 4:02 a.m., the first bombs fell. The target, China's missile production facility in Qingdao, a massive underground complex stretching the size of 40 football fields. The earth shook as the bunker busters drove straight through the surface, detonating with a thunder that registered 5.4 on the Richter scale. Entire sections of reinforced concrete collapsed inward, crushing missile silos and command rooms. Moments later, the Tomahawks arrived, igniting the wreckage into an inferno. Witnesses described the blast as a fireball nearly half a mile wide. Simultaneously, the second B-2 released its payload on a fuel depot in Fujian. Each bunker buster tore through underground tanks holding over 5 million gallons of liquid propellant. The detonation produced a chain reaction so violent that the fireball climbed nearly 2,000 feet into the sky, visible from Taiwan's western shoreline. The third and fourth B-2s struck a hardened command center outside Shanghai, built to survive a nuclear strike. But nothing could withstand 60,000 pounds of steel and explosives dropped in under 30 seconds, followed by precision cruise missiles exploding in sequence. Communications arrays shattered. Concrete towers fell. Inside the bunker, 10 senior Chinese officers, including 2 major generals, were killed instantly. By the time the smoke began to settle, over 300 Chinese troops were confirmed dead, on 200 wounded, and 3 of Beijing's most strategic bases lay in ruins. Entire missile brigades were crippled in a single hour. For the U.S. fleet watching from the Pacific, the effect was electrifying. Radar screens that once showed threats now glowed with silence. The Chinese mainland was burning in 3 separate locations, its missile forces crippled, its command structures shattered. Sailors on the Ronald Reagan looked out across the ocean, feeling history unfold. For many of them, it was like watching a scene out of the Gulf War's shock and awe campaign, but magnified tenfold. In less than 1 hour, America had unleashed over 200,000 pounds of explosives, the equivalent of 20 Hiroshima bombs worth of conventional firepower, without losing a single aircraft. The message was undeniable. China had dared to wound the United States. And in response, America had struck with precision, fury, and a scale of destruction the world had not seen in decades. But this was only the beginning. Beijing would not remain silent. And deep within China's military command, a counter-strike order was already being prepared. China's unexpected response made them regret it all over again. The smoke from the U.S. strike still hung over Qingdao, Fujian, and Shanghai when Beijing's war rooms erupted in chaos. Screens flickered, communications went dead, and the loss of senior officers left chain of command fractured. But humiliation was intolerable. At 4:30 a.m., China gave its response. Massive retaliation. Orders went out across the 2nd Artillery Corps. Missile crews scrambled into underground silos, pulling launch keys from sealed safes. Within 12 minutes, more than 20 intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, were fueled, armed, and standing at launch readiness. These were not symbolic threats. They were the crown jewels of China's arsenal, each warhead with the destructive power of 5 to 10 Hiroshima bombs. At 4:42 a.m., the launch sequence began. Towering fireballs rose from silos in Inner Mongolia, Sichuan, and Hubei. The ground quaked as thousands of tons of thrust propelled the warheads skyward. Civilians across China filmed the launches, the night sky torn apart by white-hot trails of flame. In less than 3 minutes, the warheads arced beyond the stratosphere, streaking across the Pacific at Mach 23. Over 17,000 miles per hour. Their targets, American soil. In California, air raid sirens wailed across Los Angeles, San Diego, and San Francisco. Families were jolted from their sleep as emergency broadcasts lit every television and radio. Highways jammed within minutes, with thousands trying to flee cities they feared might vanish in mushroom clouds. In Seattle and Honolulu, churches opened their doors as people gathered to pray. For older Americans who remembered the duck and cover drills of the 1950s, the nightmare had returned. Nuclear missiles were inbound. But this was not the 1950s. This was America in 2025. Within seconds, the U.S. Missile Defense Network roared to life. From Fort Greely, Alaska, 44 ground-based interceptors, GBIs, blasted upward at 22,000 miles per hour, targeting the ICBMs as they crossed the exo-atmosphere. Along the Pacific coast, Aegis destroyers launched volleys of SM-3 interceptors, each capable of shattering a warhead with kinetic impact equal to a 10-ton truck hitting at 1,000 miles per hour. In Guam and Hawaii, THAAD batteries lit the sky with streaks of interceptors, while Patriot PAC-3 systems guarded urban centers. Satellites tracked every trajectory in real time, guiding interceptors with accuracy measured in inches. The battle in space unfolded unseen to human eyes, but recorded by sensors in breathtaking clarity. One by one, Chinese ICBMs were destroyed hundreds of miles above the Earth. Some detonated in fiery blossoms, others broke apart into harmless fragments. By the time the last warhead approached within 200 miles of the American mainland, it too was intercepted, reduced to glowing debris falling harmlessly into the Pacific. The results were staggering. 20 out of 20 Chinese ICBMs neutralized. 0 U.S. casualties. Not a single city struck. For China, the cost was catastrophic. Each missile lost represented hundreds of millions of dollars, years of research, and the credibility of its deterrent power. For the United States, it was the most decisive demonstration of missile defense in history. Yet even in victory, the U.S. Navy knew this was no end. Beijing had shown its willingness to gamble with global annihilation, and Washington, staring at the data pouring in from radar networks, understood a chilling truth. This was not a one-night battle. It was the opening act of a far larger war. Here comes the final blow to China's fate. The last fragments of China's failed ICBM barrage were still burning up over the Pacific when the Pentagon made its decision. China had attempted to rain nuclear fire on American soil and failed. Now it was time to ensure they could never try again. At 5:15 a.m. Washington time, U.S. Strategic Command issued Operation Iron Thunder, a counterstrike designed not merely to punish, but to cripple. The order carried the weight of a century of American doctrine, peace through overwhelming strength. The scale was staggering. From Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, 3 B-2 Spirits and the first operational B-21 Raider stealth bomber lifted off, each carrying payloads worth 80,000 pounds of precision ordnance. From the carrier strike groups in the Pacific, 48 F-35s roared into the night sky, fully armed with AIM-120 missiles and JDAM bombs. Supporting them, 6 KC-135 and KC-46 tankers carried enough fuel to keep the skies filled for 12 continuous hours of combat. And then came the most fearsome addition. Ohio-class submarines, submerged silently off the Chinese coast, opened their launch hatches. In a single coordinated salvo, they fired 96 Tomahawk cruise missiles, each one a steel spear traveling 1,000 miles at treetop height, guided with pinpoint GPS precision. The targets were chosen with surgical intent. The Yulin Naval Base on Hainan Island, home to China's nuclear submarine fleet. The Xiangyang Air Base, which housed H-6K nuclear-capable bombers, a massive missile assembly complex in Chengdu, producing parts for ICBMs. The first explosions hit at 5:54 a.m. local Chinese time. At Yulin, Tomahawks slammed into submarine pens carved into the cliffs. The blasts tore open reinforced blast doors, igniting fuel depots and detonating torpedoes stored inside. Satellite feeds later confirmed 4 nuclear-capable submarines destroyed at dock, each valued at over $2 billion. Minutes later, Chengdu lit up as a B-2 bomber dropped 2 GBU-57 bunker busters, each weighing 30,000 pounds. The bombs drilled through the factory floor before detonating, obliterating an assembly line that produced an estimated 20 ICBMs per year. Over 600,000 square feet of industrial complex was reduced to rubble in less than a minute. Meanwhile, Xiangyang Air Base erupted under waves of F-35 strikes. Hardened aircraft shelters crumbled, and H-6 bombers worth $60 million each were shredded before they could leave the ground. By dawn, 11 bombers lay in twisted ruins, their hangars burning like torches against the horizon. The numbers were devastating. 96 Tomahawks launched, 91 confirmed hits. Over 1,200 Chinese military personnel killed or wounded in less than 1 hour. More than $15 billion worth of military assets destroyed before sunrise. For the sailors aboard the USS Ronald Reagan, watching the satellite images stream in, it was a moment of grim satisfaction. The same carrier that had nearly been crippled hours earlier was now the platform from which vengeance was delivered. For Americans watching the news back home, the shock was immediate. The United States had demonstrated not just defense, but overwhelming offensive power. In a single night, China's strategic forces had been pushed back decades. But beneath the triumph, one chilling thought lingered. A wounded dragon was still a dragon. And Beijing, humiliated and enraged, would not stop here. By the time the sun rose over the Pacific, the scale of America's strike was already being measured in boardrooms, embassies, and newsrooms around the world. Satellite images told the story no words could soften. 3 Chinese strategic bases annihilated, 4 nuclear submarines destroyed, 11 bombers reduced to wreckage, and an ICBM factory flattened. In just 6 hours, the United States had erased nearly 20% of China's long-range strike capability. For global audiences, the numbers were staggering. Analysts estimated the damage at more than $20 billion in lost assets, an economic blow equal to wiping out the annual defense budget of a mid-sized nation in a single night. On Chinese state television, anchors struggled to explain how 96 Tomahawk missiles and 80,000 pounds of bunker-busting ordnance had slipped past their defenses with near-perfect accuracy. 91 out of 96 hits confirmed. In Europe, NATO officials hailed the strike as proof that the United States remained the undisputed guardian of the free world. In Moscow, the Kremlin called for restraint but privately marveled at the precision. Never before had a nation demonstrated the ability to strike 3 hardened sites simultaneously without losing a single aircraft. For older Americans, the images were hauntingly familiar. The last time the world had trembled like this was during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, when nuclear annihilation seemed only minutes away. Now, more than 60 years later, the nightmare had returned. But this time, America's shield had held, and its sword had cut deeper than anyone imagined. The psychological effect on Beijing was severe. Generals who had once boasted of a missile wall now faced the reality that decades of investment could be reduced to rubble in one night. Soldiers who once believed American carriers were vulnerable now saw that even a wounded ship could deliver destruction on an industrial scale. By dawn on August 18, 2025, the balance of power in the Pacific had been rewritten in fire. America's missiles and bombers had destroyed over $20 billion in Chinese military assets in less than 12 hours. More than 1,500 Chinese troops were dead or wounded, 15 strategic facilities crippled, and a generation of military buildup shattered overnight. Across the globe, leaders absorbed the shock. In Tokyo, officials called it the largest one-night strike since the Gulf War. In London, analysts noted that America had unleashed more firepower in 6 hours than Britain used during the entire Falklands War. Even in Moscow, officials admitted privately that no defense system on Earth could have survived such a coordinated assault. For older Americans, the parallels were chilling. The 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis had brought the world to the brink of annihilation, but that standoff ended without a shot fired. This time, missiles had flown, bases had burned, and thousands had bled. And yet, thanks to the most advanced missile defense system ever built, 20 Chinese ICBMs, each capable of killing millions, had been destroyed before reaching U.S. soil. 0 American lives lost. The message was undeniable. To strike at the United States was to invite ruin. But history carried a darker lesson too. A humiliated adversary is never safe, and a cornered superpower can still lash out. The Pacific was quiet for the moment, but the silence felt fragile, like the pause before the next thunder. And for the world watching, one question loomed. Had the first battle of a new Cold War just begun? The events of August 17th to 18th, 2025 will be remembered as one of the most dangerous confrontations since World War II. In less than 12 hours, the Pacific Ocean saw 3 Chinese ICBMs launched, 20 more fired toward U.S. cities, and more than 300 precision American strikes delivered in response. The numbers alone are staggering. Over $35 billion in combined military assets destroyed, 1,500 Chinese casualties, and the near loss of a $13 billion U.S. aircraft carrier. And yet, the outcome was clear. America's shield held. 20 intercontinental missiles, each capable of killing millions, were reduced to glowing fragments before they touched American soil. Not a single U.S. city was hit. Not a single American civilian died. Instead, America proved that its combination of technology, discipline, and courage could withstand the most direct challenge from a rising superpower. For older generations, the echoes of history were unmistakable. Just as the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 once defined an era, this confrontation may mark the opening chapter of a new Cold War. The weapons are faster, the stakes higher, and the battlefield global. But the lesson endures. Peace is preserved not through weakness, but through strength. The men and women of the U.S. Navy stood their ground under fire and struck back with unmatched precision, reminding the world why America remains the guardian of freedom on the seas. The guns have fallen silent, for now. But the question lingers, is this fragile calm the start of peace or merely the quiet before the storm?